All right. So welcome back, folks. It's great to see everyone again. And since book tour and conventions are still on hold for a bit, as always, I figured I would bring book tour to you. So welcome to Russ's Rockin Rollercoaster Season 5, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Everyone here tonight is a fan of good mixed mystery and in particular, a good sleuth. And it would be impossible to have a serious discussion about great detectives without looking into Sherlock Holmes. From his first appearance back in 1887, thanks to Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes and his trusted partner Watson have been solving crimes that baffle Scotland Yard. And over the last century, our beloved sleuth has been crafted and recrafted by many writers in various iterations, even through today, all putting their unique spin on good old Sherlock. To find out if we can solve the mystery of what makes Sherlock Holmes tick, I've gathered some terrific writers who have all written stories about the man who calls Baker Street home. So please welcome my pal, Christopher D Abbott, an award-winning author of crime, fantasy, sci-fi, and horror. His Sherlock Holmes stories have been published in the Watson Chronicles, and he's written stories for major media outlets, including Screen Rant, and for my fellow inmates at Crazy 8 Press. Hello, Chris.
Hello, Russ. Thanks for having me on your show.
All right, great to see you. Also on our panel tonight is science fiction, fantasy, and horror author Gini Koch, who's back with us again. She's the author of the fast, fresh, and funny Alien Catherine Kitty Cat series for Daw Books, the Necropolis Enforcement Files, and the Martian Alliance Chronicles. And among other titles, she contributed Sherlock Holmes stories to altsherlock.holmes, 3 new versions of the world's greatest detective. Welcome back, Gini.
Hi, thanks for having me back. Great to be here.
All right. And last but not least, welcome my pal and fellow Crazy 8 Press inmate, Bob Greenberger. Recently reborn as an English teacher, Bob is a writer and editor of science fiction, fantasy, and mystery fiction, and is well known for his work on various Star Trek titles. He was also a long-standing editor for Marvel and DC Comics. He is a member of the Science Fiction Writers of America and the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. And with Stephen Seville, he wrote a Sherlock Holmes novel, Murder at Sorrow's Crown. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks for having me, Russ. Good to see you.
All right, you too. Okay, just a quick heads up to the folks at home. Feel free to send me notes or questions you have for the panel in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, so let's jump in. All right, so fiction is filled with crime, mystery, and detective stories with a few classic characters standing out among the rest. So what is it about Sherlock Holmes in particular that attracts you, both as a reader and as a writer? Chris, I'll start with you.
Oh, I think as a writer, I think I like the fact that he's sort of always one step ahead of me, in the sense that when I'm trying to come up with scenarios for Sherlock Holmes to fix, he's already ahead of me in my brain. He already knows what's happening and so on. But as a reader and a watcher of it, I just like how he can really give you the impression at times that he doesn't particularly know what's going on when he really does, and how he can use that sort of obfuscation to blindside you a little bit to what he wants, what he wants to find out, and the way he addresses certain people, the way he talks to them. I just like the character development over the century has really been honed down to the point where everybody, I mean, we all know who Holmes is just by looking at him, but now if you sort of were to listen to an audiobook and didn't know the title was Sherlock Holmes, I think by the style of speech, by the way he presents his wording, the way he asks questions, I think you know which sleuth you're listening to. So I think I like that. I think it's because he's so identifiable, regardless of who's playing him or who's writing him.
So Ginny, what about you?
Well, as I know you know, I started reading The Complete Sherlock Holmes when I was 7, and he was my first literary crush. So what I love about him as a reader is that he's so three-dimensionally drawn, and so is Watson, and really so is everybody. Doyle was a fantastic writer, and he really gives you your sense of place as well as your sense of character. And the mysteries are nice and twisty, but the clues are always there for you to solve. And I always feel cheated when I'm watching a mystery show or I'm reading a mystery, and at the last second, something shows up, or we see the detective figure it out, but we could never have figured it out. We don't have all the clues that the detective has. I find that a cheat. I think everybody should have the clues just because you don't see them like Holmes does. In terms of writing Holmes, it's fun. I like doing it. Mysteries obviously are my first love. And so everything I write tends to have a mystery in it, regardless of what genre it actually falls into. My characters are still going to have to figure out something to solve. And I put that totally to Holmes and my fascination with him and all the, and Nancy Drew and all the other stuff that goes along with it. But none of those would have existed without Holmes and Watson. And one of the joys I got was I got to make my own Holmes when we were writing for 221 Baker Streets and Alt Sherlock Holmes. We were asked, you could not do the conventional Holmes, and you had to be in a Baker Street somewhere, but somewhere else. Okay.
Yeah, hold on to that. We're gonna get to that.
Leaping ahead.
Yes. You're giving away too many clues too fast.
I'm sorry.
I know. All right, Bob, and you?
It's interesting thinking back to that, trying to come up with a good answer for you. Compared to my peers here, I'm very late to reading Doyle. I knew of who Sherlock Holmes was. He was there in the ether. I knew him from the Basil Rathbone movies as they were rerunning on New York television, on the weekends and all. But I hate to say it, but I think my first real exposure to Holmes as a real character before reading the Doyle stories was when he crossed over with Batman in the 1970s, and a story Mike Barr and I think E.R. Cruz did. I love the character, and I was reading things like Nick Meyer's 7% Solution before I was reading Doyle. It's just a weird backwards way into Holmes. But given that Batman is one of my favorite heroes and the detective nature of it, I'm drawn to the detective in Holmes, the clues, the just sheer brilliance of the way his mind works without the gadgets. And before much forensic science was really known, there's a real appeal to being able to use his wits and his mind. He was just so uniquely drawn by Doyle. When I finally read the story, he's like, I get it now.
So I want to follow up. So in many ways, Sherlock couldn't be Sherlock without Watson. What makes their dynamic work? So Bob, since you just keep going with that thread.
Before we went live, I was kidding around and calling him the first companion. To me, Watson, in that very first story, we see that he was a military man and he was a doctor and he could hold up for himself. He was intelligent. He had a life apart from Holmes, which made him an equal. And they fed off each other because Holmes needed someone to show his brilliance to on a regular basis, who would understand him and not feel belittled. And he, in turn, valued Watson's expertise in things Holmes himself didn't know, especially since case after case, he would empty out his, mental file cabinets. So to me, Watson was as fully realized a character as Holmes. And I think that's one reason why their partnership works so well together.
Yeah,
Totally agree.
Go ahead, Jenny, please.
I was going to say, I totally agree with Bob's take on that. I can get real frosty when someone starts acting like Watson's an idiot, because he's not.
No.
And this is an intelligent, competent, experienced man who is not a moron. And he also allows the reader to not feel utterly stupid, because he's seen everything. He's seen the same clues we have, and we're not getting it any more than Watson is, but we still had the ability to get it. But it's not embarrassing because, Dr. Watson didn't figure it out either, because none of us are Sherlock Holmes. And that I think is also important. So I hate the portrayals of Watson where he's a blubbering idiot, because he's not. And so I'm totally with Bob. I think Bob's take, especially interesting from someone coming late to it, because a lot of times people who come late to it have this view of Watson as an idiot. So Bob, you are a genius, man. Seeing the truth right away.
So Chris, along those
Far
lines,
from it, but
yeah.
thank you.
So Chris, I think what I'm hearing, and this is kind of my take on Watson, is that I think what makes him work in the dynamic is that he's so grounded, right? I mean, he's the real anchor. So, you know, Holmes can sort of spin off and be sort of like that, you know, eccentric genius, but without Watson, he's a bit untethered.
Yeah.
But for Watson to be that, you know, that anchor, you can't just be a faceless body who happens to be there. You got to be able to stand toe to toe with the most brilliant mind that you'll ever come across, right? Which means you got to have some real inner strength.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the thing, you know, just echoing what my fellow panelists have just said, that the Watson dynamic is simply that he is the heart and the passion and the soul behind a lot of what's happening in the story, and Sherlock Holmes is the brains, but the two are absolutely intrinsically linked. Forgetting the two stories, I believe, that were actually in Holmes's voice, every story we read is from Watson's point of view. So Watson recognizes immediately that he doesn't get everything. And I think even in my own stories, my Watson actually will admit that he wasn't quick at picking up on some of these extraneous clues, but he was a medical professional, you know, modeled on Conan Doyle himself. Nobody gets to be a doctor in the 19th century and then be accused of being a blubbering fool. They're just not. My love of Watson grew after watching the Granada television series as Jeremy Brett and David Burke and Edward Hardwicke, and those people's portrayal, these amazing actors. David Burke himself was a lead actor as well as Jeremy Brett. They took the dynamics of that role, because I think when I was reading it, there was something like, for David Burke, it was difficult because Watson's dialogue was very small in the books because he was a narrator. So they had to do a lot of work to give him lots, you know, enough dialogue. I liked the dynamic that those two had, and I liked the fact that Holmes's frustration, which was usually levied towards Watson, he could deal with that in a way that a good friend, you know, a very good friend could deal with it. He was the heart, the soul, and the passion, but he didn't let Holmes get away with too much. You know, sometimes, I mean, how many times has Holmes put Watson in mortal danger? I mean, he's done it quite frequently, and always with a caveat, I never expected that, you know, or I never thought for a second that you would be, and yet, nevertheless. But I think that that's really important dynamic between them, is that they understand what is required of each of them.
I like the way that you put that right there. There's an intrinsic, even if it's unspoken, they understand one another, and they understand what the other needs to bring out the best in the both of them. So look, every great hero needs a great foil. Talk to me about Moriarty. So Chris, why don't keep going, even though he doesn't show up in the books that much. What's your take on Moriarty and how he fits into the lexicon of Holmes?
Well, I have two sort of opinions of this whole Moriarty side. One is obviously it was a foil for the author to get rid of the character, so he created Moriarty on a whim to kill off Sherlock Holmes, and because Sherlock Holmes himself was so clever and so capable of solving everything, he needed somebody that was just as clever. Opposite sides of the two coin, etc. But I actually quite like the character of Moriarty, and I like the character in a way that I would have really liked to have seen a little more, and some pastiches out there have developed that dynamic between them too. Even Conan Doyle went back and wrote The Valley of Fear after, some years after he'd killed the character off, to give us a little bit more background into the Moriarty character. I think there was a stage play years ago Jeremy Brett did, where I think it was called The Secret of Sherlock Holmes. Him and Edward Hardwicke did it together, and it literally is Holmes being both Moriarty and him and Holmes at the same time. Like he has a dark side, and that dark side manifests in this idea that perhaps Moriarty didn't actually exist. And I believe that in the Sherlock series, the BBC Sherlock series, they really investigate the idea that actually Moriarty was actually Holmes, and that it was some sort of dark manifesting side of his personality where he was unable to see the differences, and so he was chasing himself a lot of the time. But I like the character. I like the fact that there's an important. It's a necessity when you make a character so clever and so intelligent. You have to have a foil. Otherwise, by the time you read the 57th story, you're realizing, well, it doesn't matter. He's always going to solve it. Superman is always going to be able to save the day. You know, he needs kryptonite, and I think for Conan Doyle to create one of the first superheroes, as Holmes really was a superhero, just didn't have a cape.
Yes, we're going to get to that in a bit. So, Bob, what about
his kryptonite?
So Bob, you certainly someone who spent so much of your career in the comic book world, where you've got superheroes, supervillains. What's your thoughts on Moriarty?
I think one of the reasons Moriarty resonates so strongly is a lot of what Chris already said, but we have to remember the context. From 87 going forward, the public had not seen a character like Holmes or a character like Watson, and the mysteries that they were solving time and time again. So when there was an indelible character, or the way Doyle wrote about an indelible character, people hadn't seen anything like that before. There really was no arch villain in a lot of the previous stories that were in the various magazines and newspapers in England. So when Moriarty strides onto the page, he's so much larger than life. He's just like Holmes. Everyone glommed onto him. And the fact that he was the one to precipitate Sherlock Holmes' seeming death just, was a stamp that was an indelible one. But I think Chris is right. After all those stories, you needed to raise the stakes. Moriarty addressed that need.
So, hey, Jenny, I want to shift, just kind of moving a little bit forward. So how does, talk to me about Mycroft a little bit, and how or does he add to the Sherlock Holmes mythology?
Oh, I think Mycroft definitely adds. As characters go, I prefer Mycroft over Moriarty. I look at Moriarty as a necessary evil because he exists. He has to be in what you write now in this day and age. I get why he's there. I think there's been a lot of really great things done with him. But I was perfectly happy with Holmes solving all the cases. And I love it when Mycroft comes in, because Mycroft is, per Sherlock himself, actually smarter. He's just lazy and he doesn't want to do any of the stuff. So he'll call his slightly less smart brother, who is more willing to be active, which I think is a fascinating, I think that's a fascinating take, that there's actually someone that Sherlock admits is smarter than him. And he's high up in government, and he's clearly, if he's not in MI6, he's creating MI6. That's a kind of what I think of Mycroft. But Mycroft is very, Mycroft kind of also to me is the reminder that the Holmes family is not a poor family. This is a connected family. Mycroft is in the highest reaches of government, doing shadowy things that we don't really talk about, but that we know were there, meaning that their parents were probably connected as well, which the show Elementary really focused a lot on in that way. But I like Mycroft. I think he is one of those characters that he can be fun to write because there isn't a lot about him. I mean, I think that's one of the reasons people glom onto Moriarty. There's not very much about him. I call it the Boba Fett syndrome. Boba Fett is nothing, but Boba Fett he was in a couple of key scenes, And therefore, there's not a lot about him. So you could create whatever you wanted with that character. And I feel like that's one of the advantages of Mycroft and Moriarty as well. So I think Mycroft is great.
You
Chris,
know,
yeah,
to
go.
me, Mycroft is similar to Moriarty in that Holmes needed a foil. He needed somebody as smart as him. But Mycroft exists to tell the reader, well, as smart as Holmes is, and you're wowed by him, Mycroft's even, that much smarter. And Holmes hates that his brother is that much smarter, and it gives a dynamic that for the writer had to have been fun to write, especially, clearly Doyle was getting tired of these stories and needed to keep his interest up, which is one reason why I think Mycroft exists.
Yeah, and I think later portrayals of the Mycroft character, people like Charles Gray, who played him in the series, wonderful, because really Mycroft had such small amounts, and yet every scene he had was very, very poignant. I think Mycroft as a character is a good mixture of some of the elements of Watson and Holmes. I like the idea that Mycroft is not quite as stoic and the calculating machine that Watson says Holmes is, although to be fair, in the dynamic of their relationship over a period of time, Holmes does to begin to develop a sense of an emotional being that he wasn't written at the beginning, and I like that development of him. But Mycroft definitely had something that we were all intrigued by but never quite got the answer to, and I think that's probably why, like Moriarty, he's endured for so long, because there's just too many questions. We just didn't get all the answers
In both cases, right? It's the case of less is more. So women are not always held in the highest regard by Sherlock Holmes. What's your take on that? And then talk to me about how Irene Adler fits into his worldview. Chris,
woman.
The woman.
I have to say that I have made a subtle change in my stories to give my Sherlock Holmes a sense of appreciation for the skills of women, and not just to ignore them over their sex. That obviously is a departure from the original, because Holmes did have quite disparaging things to say about women, which I think even Watson raised an eyebrow at occasionally. I like the idea that, I like to think in my mind, that when Conan Doyle was writing a Scandal in Bohemia, that he was addressing that issue himself. That here he has written this character and he's given him a certain trait, and here comes along a woman who bests him, and bests him in a way that no other villain ever managed to do. Saw through his disguise, saw through his tricks, recognized what he was doing, popped herself into male clothing and walked past, and then had the audacity to say, "Good night, Mr. Sherlock Holmes." And yet in every respect outwitting and outfoxing him and being one step ahead of him. And I think that did change him, and it did change his personal view of women. And I took that one stage further later on, because I felt that it was important, perhaps because we're 100 years on from that time, that I felt that if Holmes had been bested by somebody of that degree, to that degree, he would be more inclined to be reminded of it. I think he said something like, if ever I think it was Watson that says, he always used to say bad things about women, but I haven't heard him say them very often since. And I think that was Conan Doyle's way of perhaps addressing that. But it was very difficult, because obviously back in that time, the views were very different. And so, the readers for The Strand were probably all male. Or very, a high proportion of them were all male, and it was a different time. And I think now we can kind of get away with being a little bit loose with it. I have created a couple of female characters in my home stories, and they're very strong, intelligent characters, and they won't put up with that kind of chauvinistic viewpoint. So, but
hey,
yeah.
Ginny, what about you? What's your take on this?
Well, I agree with Chris some, but not totally. Um, I do absolutely agree that Holmes's attitude towards women changes after his experience with Irene Adler. But he is normally very, very kind and quite protective of with of and for most of his female clients.
True.
Yes, he'll shout at Mrs. Hudson, but you'd better not threaten Mrs. Hudson because Holmes is going to do something to you if you do anything to her. He is very protective of his female clients. He is rarely dismissive of them. Um, Holmes to me has more of a problem with authority that isn't his,
Yes.
or aristocracy
Mm.
than he does with women or the lower classes. I mean, very, very frequently, he's very kind to and very understanding. Whether he's pretending or not doesn't matter to those people. He's very kind. He's protective. I can't remember which case it is where they're going out to the country, and he's like, if this client had taken the same position in the city, I wouldn't have any fear for her, but I am frightened for her. He's frightened for this client they're going out to protect and save. So
You thinking
I
about the
think
story with the snakes?
no, that's a different
No.
one, but that's yet another one where he is extremely protective of his female clients. And there's a lot of them where he's like, this is not good, and we've got to, protect this young woman. So I see him as a little bit, he's a little bit chivalrous, and I don't think he wants to admit it. But I really do think, I really do agree with Chris that Scandal in Bohemia is how Doyle allows the character growth. I mean, Holmes does grow. We talked about it. I think Bob brought it up, where he's not really an automaton by the time he and Watson have been friends for so long. He is genuinely upset if he thinks harm has come to his friend and things like that. That's character growth. That's part of the reason why I think we stay interested in the character all these years, because we got to see him grow. So, and we all use Irene Adler simply because she's iconic enough, because she bested him, that she, like Mycroft and like Moriarty, is really fun to bring back in. So I like her. I like what it is, but I think Holmes wants to say he hates and distrusts women more than he actually does hate and distrust women.
Interesting. So, Bob, go ahead.
What little I have to add is probably Doyle is a product of his era.
Mm-hmm.
He is a product of the Scottish upbringing of the second half of the 19th century. So he would marry and have children. So he had a relationship with women, but he was devoted to his work. I don't think he treated women in print any differently than he would have in real life. I just think that's the era, that's the society. It's would have been nicer had he been a little more woke, but
right, fair enough. So Bob, I want to, you talked about it slightly a little bit before. We touched on it, when you kind of compared Holmes to Batman a little bit. He's my favorite character also. But one of Sherlock Holmes' powers is his uncanny attention to detail and deductive reasoning, almost to the degree that he is, in a way, and Chris, you said it, a superhero. So my question is this: is he too good for us to truly believe, or is he so good that we want to believe?
Oh, wow. Good question. Given what Doyle had Holmes do, he did the drudge work. He did the research. He consulted with people to learn about chemistry and experiment and burn 143 different types of cigarettes and cigars and write about a monograph on it. He would test poisons. He would do all of this stuff. He would do whatever he needed to become proficient for the purposes of a case, and then immediately forget it probably. But that meant he was incredibly prepared. but obviously being a fictional character, his readers bought into it and wanted to believe. So there's definitely a lot of wanna in this.
Chris, Jenny?
I think, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, I was just going to agree that I think he's modeled on the real life Dr. Ian Bell, and that gentleman was the man that gave Conan Doyle the idea for Sherlock Holmes, because here's a man that could almost practically diagnose you of whatever illness you had just by looking at you and tell you what your job was and so on. And I think the idea that was a skill that really couldn't be learned, I think it is incorrect. I mean, it would be hard now with the thousands and thousands of different types of jobs, but back then, you know, that the workers were in certain classes and categories, and it was quite easy to pinpoint what people were doing. I think that the answer to your question from my perspective is that he's so good, I just want to, you know, I definitely want that, all of that. I want more of it, you know, and I don't think it's because he's too clever. I think it's because I want to be that clever.
Pure wish fulfillment, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But I think he's flawed. So that doesn't make him perfect. I mean, one of the problems with Superman is that he's literally perfect. That's why
Actually,
you have
I'll slightly tweak my question. It's not that I don't mean too good at everything, but he's just, is he too good at what he's good at to truly believe? Or is he so good at what he's good at that we just want to believe that he can be that good?
I don't have any problem believing it. So I guess I don't feel like I want to believe it. I feel like I have no problem believing it,
Right.
because it's just like Bob and Chris said, he studies, he works hard. You know, it's like, you want to know how you never miss a free throw? You go out and you practice making free throws for hours and hours and hours, and then you're not going to miss. He's working really hard. You know, someone else, Lestrade wants to call it luck. Holmes is going to say, no, I'm sorry, I just put in like 6 times the hours you did on this one thing. So what he is he's focused and he's driven, and because he's flawed, it makes him believable. He doesn't get along well with a lot of people. He has big problems with authority. He is mistrustful of women because well, it's already been proven. What they can beat him, right? He's distrustful of women. He doesn't care if I think, was it the Earth is flat or round? There's some basic thing that he doesn't care, because it does not. He'll care if he has to judge how far the ship went down over the sea, but he does not care if it doesn't relate to his work. So he's very focused, and I just don't see that as. I don't see that is too good to be true, or I want it to be true. I feel Doyle made him so believable that 100 and some years later, we're still talking about this character.
For sure.
We're all writing this character. I think he's one of the, I call him he's one of the perfect characters to me. So I don't have a problem. He is that good.
So along those lines, so I didn't actually read a lot of Sherlock Holmes, but I always knew about him and I watched more than I saw, but I didn't really realize this about him until really it was the guy who played Robert Downey Jr.
Robert Downey Jr., the steampunk ones.
Yeah. He's really physical, right? So how does that element to the character, how does that round him out a bit?
I think it means that even though he's a little more slender and wiry, that he can't be intimidated. There is the one with the snake. I can't believe I can't remember these stories.
Man.
Thank you. The speckled man. Their stepfather comes and is, twisting an iron bars to threaten him, and Holmes waits and he puts it back. It's like, I'm not afraid of you. And I think one of the things that's nice is a lot of times the brain is somebody who's constantly getting beaten up, and no one's going to beat Sherlock Holmes up. If they do, it's because he was jumped and it was a bunch of them and he couldn't get away. But he can do fisticuffs, he can box, he can do all those things. That's all taken from the stories. So I think it makes him far less, he can't really be threatened. You're not going to threaten him physical violence because he's just gonna, throat punch you when you're not looking, or similar. So I think it makes him even more incorruptible because no one can physically threaten him. I think that gives him that extra layer of protection for his virtue and his morality.
I like the word incorruptible for him. And I think that's right. Downey went for the physical because that's what today's audiences expect. And it's an aspect of the character that, the Benedict Cumberbatch version didn't touch on, and Jeremy Brett didn't touch on it that often. So it was a way to differentiate this Holmes from previous Holmes.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, that's Guy Ritchie. And Guy Ritchie's style is very, very much let's throw down.
I think Bob's right. Every actor has got their own sort of take on Holmes, and every writer has got their own way of trying to bring something new to that role. And I think when Jeremy Brett was starting out doing the series, of course, he was riding the coattails of some great actors who had played Sherlock Holmes previously, including people like Basil Rathbone and a few others. There were some great actors who played Sherlock Holmes and didn't particularly do a great job with it. Peter Cushing was one I thought a fabulous actor to be cast, but just awful writing for him that never made that character come to life. But where Basil Rathbone was the man of action, and constantly out running around, Jeremy Brett's Sherlock Holmes was the brain, the thinking man's Holmes. And I think that we see that quite a lot. And I think what they did with Benedict Cumberbatch was perhaps use both of those elements to give that character a little nuance. But I will be honest, I did not care for the Robert Downey Jr. films at all. I did not think that Robert Downey Jr. was cast well in the role, even though I adore him as an actor. But nevertheless, as a steampunk version, I think that they did a good job with it, and I think they did a good job of creating a steampunk Victorian ideas of Holmes. And the only saving grace for me in that film was Stephen Fry as Mycroft.
I actually thought Jude Law was quite good.
Jude Law is perfect. To me, Jude Law is Watson. That is my perfect. If I get to pick and choose, Jeremy Brett is, yes, he's the number one Holmes. By the way, I'm a huge fan of Elementary. Johnny Lee Miller, I think, does a fabulous
job. We're gonna get to that stuff in a minute.
But Jude Law to me is a perfect Watson.
Okay, so we're running low on time. I got one more question. All right. So this is the money shot. All right, above almost all other no. Above almost all.
Your words, man. Your words.
Oh boy, this is my fault. I walked right into that one. Above almost all others in mystery fiction, why does the character and the myth of Sherlock Holmes endure? Ginny.
Because it's to me, I think he was really the first. There's the argument about, the other one, again, blanking. I had this all prepared, but not as soon as we're rolling. But
you think Poe or somebody else?
No, the French detective, Murders in the Rue Morgue. Yeah. So he's really the first that catches on. And Doyle created an entire genre of fiction, and it's the first, and it's well enough written that it still resonates today. There's not everything from different eras can translate well. The classics we still force our teenagers to read in high school. Most of those books have absolutely no relatability to what's going on today, and you wonder why kids don't want to read, right? And yet you can still read Sherlock Holmes, and yes, there's more words because description really mattered because most people hadn't seen the places he's describing, but at the same time, the mysteries are still good. Holmes and Watson have this great dynamic, and it's just something you can still pick up and read today and enjoy.
Yep.
And I think that's why it's lasted.
Chris?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think everything you said was spot on. I think that for me, the reason that the character has endured is because when you pick up one of those books and read it, you can be lost in that world, and it's a disappointment when it comes to an end. And because Sherlock Holmes works so well in short story format, however, you've got an hour or 2 hours, you can pick up one of these short stories and read it. And I think that is what was key for me as a growing up, was being able to just like, I want to read something, but I haven't got much time. I'll read a Sherlock Holmes story, and you get so sucked into this kind of world that when you leave it, it's a disappointment. And I think 100 years later, people are still feeling that in that regard. And I think that's why he's endured.
All right, Bob?
Poe helped create the detective genre, but it really fell to Doyle to create the archetypical detective. And because Doyle was such a prodigious writer and he was putting out the stories with great regularity, he was able to build an audience that was eager for the next story and run out and get the magazine as soon as it was available. And he did it for years until, the death. And there was that long break. But up till then, people were luxuriating in these stories and trying to outguess him, and people knew what they were getting. I think there was a lot of that when there was nothing else like it. There was no one else like it back then, which gave us this iconic character. And, in America, the equivalent might be Nick Carter, who was a contemporary, with the dime novels and all. No one remembers Nick Carter today because he wasn't that iconic a character.
Isn't it though a bit
You all remember Holmes.
All right, guys, that was great, but we got to move on. Now it's time for a special segment where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are 7 possible categories. Wherever it lands is what you get. And the categories are: the game is afoot, the Sherlock Holmes, My Dear Watson, Elementary, Flip the Script, Dinner for Two, and No Shit Sherlock. All right, Chris, you're up first. You ready?
Okay, yeah.
All right, here we go.
Are you scared? I'm scared.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. All right. You get Elementary.
Okay.
Elementary by Dear Watson. In an alternate life, Dr. Watson is an elementary school teacher, and one of his students is 9-year-old Sherlock Holmes. Sherlock is already a distraction in class. How does Mr. Watson keep young Sherlock occupied?
I think if I was writing that myself, I think Watson would recognize his intelligence and give him enough work to absorb. If he's disruptive because he's bored, which I'm not a school teacher, I know Bob is, but if I think that a lot of children get bored in class because they're perhaps they're above where they need to be, or they're just distracted and so on. So I think he would give him extra work, and I think he would find out what he likes and give him more of it and make him do it. And I think Sherlock Holmes as a 9-year-old will definitely be able to do that.
I think they should have snuffed out the class goldfish and make Sherlock solve the mystery, but that's just me. All right, Ginny, you're up next. You ready?
Okay. Yeah.
All right, here we go.
I guess.
All right, and you got The Game is Afoot.
Okay.
You wake up one day and discover you're missing one of your feet. Who in your immediate circle is most likely to be the culprit?
Oh my God, my dog.
What kind of dog do you have?
Well, the one I'm thinking
Hungry.
of is he's a Dachshund Chihuahua Min Pin mix, and he is, I call him the little big dog. If he was feeling hungry, he'd go for it. And then
All right. So he's your hound of the Baskervilles. All right, Bob.
Yeah.
All right,
my
that's you.
little
You ready? Okay, here we go. All right, and Bob, what do we got for you? Let's spin the wheel, and we have got No Shit Sherlock. Okay.
I learned that phrase from my father.
Okay. All right. So No Shit Sherlock is one of those sarcastic.
Dumb.
No Shit Sherlock is one of those sarcastic catchphrases to express that someone has stated the obvious. Give me a catchphrase for Watson.
Wow. Catchphrase for Watson. Wow.
All right. In a panel
Just
of
help me.
mysteries, you got stumped.
But
Chris,
home.
I'm using my lifeline. Help me.
Oh, yes. Oh, it's me now.
I've got it. But
Go
on,
Holmes.
please,
But
Ginny.
Holmes. But Holmes. But Holmes.
But Holmes. All right.
Wow.
All right. Fair enough. All right. So let's go to our advice column as we always do. All right, Bob, we're going to start with you again. Maybe this will be a little bit of an easy one for you. What's the best and worst? So we're all writers here, and there's a bunch of writers out watching us. What's the best and worst writing advice you've ever gotten?
Oh, wow. Okay. The worst might be write what you know, because you're being told that when you don't know anything and you haven't had a lot of experiences. So, you're hearing that when you're a high school kid and, you're only going to write high school stories and you really don't know a lot. So no, that's bad advice. Best advice, could be never send in your first draft.
Yes.
Yes, excellent.
Very
advice.
good advice.
Yeah, never send in your first draft ever. All right, Chris, what about you?
Same question.
Best and worst writing advice you've ever gotten?
I think the best writing advice I got from somebody was, when I was struggling with my dyslexia, was to not worry about that. To just things like grammar and so on can be fixed later, but get the story elements down of what you want to do. And I think that I was getting stuck with that. So my best advice for anybody who's struggling, who's overly worrying about the grammar side of things over the story, is to get the story down. You can work on the grammar and so on later. So I think that was the big advice that I got, which really helped me. And the worst advice I got was, I don't know. I don't like to think that all advice is bad. So even when people give you bad advice, sometimes there's elements of it that are good. I can't really think of the worst advice I've got, other than perhaps, as Bob said, when you finish your story, you think it's finished and it's good enough to show someone, when in reality it's not the case. So I think I'm probably going to steal Bob's idea and say, don't show anyone your first draft.
All right, quick interlude for folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for me or the panel, send them in the chat box and we'll get to them in a couple of minutes. All right, Ginny, how about you? I know we had this question last time, but
they haven't changed. I have two worst advice.
Right.
One is you can only write if you outline, which is great for term papers and business proposals, but not so great if you happen to be an extreme linear writer, which it turns out that I am. And finish what you start. If I had done that, I wouldn't have a career. Not everything you start should be finished. Sometimes it's just started to start. Sometimes you're going to go back to it later. I am not of the adage of finish what you start. I am of the adage of finish what you're able to finish, not what you started. And the best writing advice I got was probably that, and I say this a lot, and I don't remember who it was that said it to me first, but there are no new ideas under the sun. And It doesn't matter, because the idea is nothing. It is how you write it, your voice, that matters. The idea, dime a dozen. How you write is what matters. So that to me is important.
Execution is critical. All right, so we're going to take a couple of questions from the folks who are watching at home, and I've got one right here. So, question for anyone who wants to answer: Who could play, or who would you want to see Sherlock Holmes play Sherlock Holmes now if it were to be rebooted?
I want Johnny Lee Miller, because I think he was great in Elementary. So that's my vote, Johnny Lee Miller.
I'd like to see Ewan McGregor tackle the role.
Oh, that's a good one.
I see him more as Watson.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Okay, Bob.
I'm thinking about it because I'm trying to come up with, at what point in Holmes's career would we want to cast a character, and then what kind of an actor would be good for it? Because it's somebody, Ewan McGregor, maybe. I'm thinking somebody maybe a little older, a little more experienced, and I need IMDb to, just flip through stuff.
All right,
I have not done this mental casting in a long time.
All right, we're tripping you up tonight, Bob. All right, we'll give you one chance.
Not a good night
to redeem yourself. All right, question for Chris.
Oh.
Do you find yourself doing less and less historical research with each Holmes story you write, or is it always a necessity?
No, it's always a necessity. I do a lot of research and I plan out the research as a big part of my writing process. Yes.
Okay. All right. What else do we got here? All right. There's one question I didn't ask before that I wanted to get to. So we're going to do it now, which is going to lead.
I have to ask, I saw something flash up. Well, did anybody ask really early on about The Great Mouse Detective?
Yes.
Because if they did,
Yeah. So the
the
yes.
best. It was
Yeah.
our daughter's favorite movie for
It's an
several
awesome
years.
movie.
And I have the entire thing memorized. You can wake me up in the middle of the night and leave me the first line and I can do the rest of the thing. Love it. Love that interpretation. Love Basil of Baker Street. Those books are wonderful too.
All right. Great. All right. So now what we're going to do is, folks, well, watching at home, every panelist here has written some Sherlock Holmes. So we're going to see what they got for us. So I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me just a moment. And if I don't get it right, I will fix it. So hold on. Okay, let me get rid of this. Oh, hold on. Sorry. I don't know why. I always have problems sharing the screen.
Well, I can see some of it. I can see Chris's book.
Yeah, here we go. Why this is not taking up the whole screen, I don't know. Hang on, sorry. You'll have to bear with me 1 second. I don't know why, no matter how many times I just, oh wait, here it is. You are sharing.
We can talk about The Great Mouse Detective some more.
All right, Chris. So,
Yeah.
So you seen this to shoot your broken glass?
I am, yes, I am.
Okay, so talk to us about it. What do we got here?
Broken Glass is the 5th book in my Watson Chronicles. They're all independent stories, of course, so you don't have to read them in any kind of order. Broken Glass is a story set in 1901, so it's a little later on in their friendship, and it's essentially Holmes goes on holiday, and while he's there, somebody is murdered, and he solves the crime. And I think that the idea for me was, I just come off of writing The Black Lantern, which was quite a complex story, and I wanted something a little more linear and a little bit more light. And this is he arrives on the Sunday, he solves it by the Tuesday. I like that. And I took the element of a short story, and just because all of mine are novellas, they're 40,000 words. So I took the element of a short story and I just wanted to make it a little bigger. And that was it. So there's a very few number of people in there that he interviews, and then he solves it. And it was a joy to write. And I'm really hopeful that it does as well as the other books have done.
Great. All right. So Ginny, what do we got?
Okay. Abaddon Books did an anthology called 221 Baker Streets, where we had to write, it couldn't be your standard Holmes and Watson. They couldn't be in England as they were, and they wanted, exotic, different locations, different kind of Holmes and Watson. So I made my Holmes a woman and put her and Watson in present day Los Angeles. And the anthology did really well, and the editor chose the 3 Sherlocks that were his favorite, of which mine is one. And we got to write the next novellas for our characters. And so in Alt Sherlock Holmes, you get both the short stories, the introduction to these characters, and then you get our next novellas. So it's really fun. I love doing it. I like my Holmes. I like her Watson. And yes, I have Irene Adler in there, and there are hints of Moriarty. I do plan on writing more of them in my copious spare.
All right. All right, Bob, what do we got?
So Murder at Charles Crown has a weird origin story, but it's a standalone Holmes story. It's set fairly early in his career. So he and Watson are still rooming together, and they're worried about paying the rent and stuff. But it takes them dealing with international intrigue when a woman comes and says, my son has gone missing during the Boer War, and I'm told he was a traitor, and my son could never have been a traitor to his country. You got to figure out what happened. So Holmes takes the case out of pity for the woman and uncovers all sorts of malfeasance.
All right, very cool. And I want to give a quick shout out. I didn't do it before, I meant to. So some years ago, I edited an anthology for Crazy 8 Press. I don't know if you can see it up here, Love, Murder, Mayhem. And one of our Crazy 8 Press inmates, Mary Fan, did a version of Sherlock, who was an AI. This is a sci-fi version where she's an AI built to resemble a teen girl, and Watson is a young female engineer who rescued her from a scrap pile. So just a little shout out over there. And then last, but hopefully not least, for me, since you're all fans of private eyes and mystery fiction, I'm really excited to share my newest book with you, Fractured Lives, the second in my ongoing series featuring a hard-boiled intergalactic private eye, Angela Hardwick, who I think of her as part Doctor Who, part Blade Runner, and part Philip Marlowe. In Fractured Lives, Darla Fine, a college freshman and galaxy design savant, is suffering from a nervous breakdown, or is she a victim of an urban legend known as the Scarlet Raj? As Hardwick follows the intersecting worlds of art galleries, college dorms, and a semi-secret clan that patches up tears in the universe, her investigation will either uncover a hoax gone wrong or a plot that could shift the balance of power across the entire realm, if only she can fight through her own paranoia to tell the difference. In Fractured Lives, Angela Hardwick is confronted by a PI's worst nightmare, dark secrets from her past that threaten to destroy her future. Fractured Lives and the series, first book in the series, Crackle and Fire, are both available on Amazon and published by Crazy 8 Press. And if you want signed copies, you can order them directly from me. All right. I want to thank our panel here tonight. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Ginny. Thank you, Chris, for coming out tonight. And I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. I'm your host, Russ Colchamiro, and I'll see you all next week. All right. Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right. Thanks
Good night,
so much.
everyone.
Hope you had a good time. Take care now.